explicit connotations. Well, I'm Elise from the crowdfunded translation project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup, and the limits of electoralism has aged extremely well, and is well worth reading for anyone interested in the period. The Chilean left is sort of in a media bubble, and the Anglosphere left really doesn't do a great job of breaking that bubble and really building connections there. So the discussion that you hear in English about Chile, even in supposed left outlets, such as Jargon, often has little or nothing to do with the state of discussion amongst comrades in Chile. So this is part of my attempts to contribute to sort of breaking down that bubble and fostering some understanding of the thought amongst revolutionaries in Chile, both historically and currently. I have so far translated 7 articles, including a long read on electoralism versus armed struggle called Chile, the Ballad or the Bullet by Punto Final editor Manuel Caviese, and currently am working on various pieces of political analysis from the eve of the electoral campaign that would bring Salvador Allende to power, or at least to government. These include discussions of electoral versus revolutionary strategy and how and to what extent these things can coexist, discussions of US imperialist interference in Chilean politics, One of the challenges of this project, since its inception, has been getting the word out. The billionaire-controlled black box algorithms that dominate our lives don't like small creators or small projects. Nor are they particularly keen on ideological viewpoints that are inconsistent with the whims of billionaires. What's more, they positively detest anyone who isn't paying for reach. And then they turn around and make it ever harder to do even that in a useful way. The result of all this is that there are definitely considerably more people who would be interested in this project than actually see any of my posts about it. And that's why I have a small favor to ask you. Tell your friends about the crowdfunded translation project. Share the completed translations, link the Patreon and the Facebook pages. All those links are in the description. Let people know that this project exists and what it's all about. Let them know that I want to hear their ideas for future crowdfunded translation projects at crowdfunded_translations@elisehendrick.com. And if you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Ultimately, the crowdfunded translation project is for us all. The whole idea is to translate texts that have fallen through the cracks by making it economically viable for a professional translator, i.e. me, to work on them and to make the results freely available to everyone. I think that a lot of great things are coming out of the project, and even more can result from it yet. But it all depends on making the project visible to the people who might benefit from it and consider supporting it. Thank you for watching for this length of time. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that it will encourage you to get in touch with the crowdfunded translation project, look at our translations, to get in touch with, to get involved with the crowdfunded translation project. Make suggestions, read the translations, let people know that this exists. This could be a great resource, but it's been a real fucker trying to get the word out about it. So thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Hey, implicit connotations. Well, I'm Elise from the Crowdfunded Translation Project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik Women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup, and the limits of electoralism has aged extremely well, and is well worth reading for anyone interested in the period. The Chilean left is sort of in a media bubble, and the Anglosphere left really doesn't do a great job of breaking that bubble and really building connections there. So the discussion that you hear in English about Chile, even in supposed left outlets, such as Jacobin, often has little or nothing to do with the state of discussion amongst comrades in Chile. So this is part of my attempts to contribute to sort of breaking down that bubble and fostering some understanding of the thought amongst revolutionaries in Chile, both historically and currently. I have so far translated 7 articles, including a long read on electoralism versus armed struggle called Chile, the Ballot or the Bullet by Punto Final editor Manuel Cabiese, and currently am working on various pieces of political analysis from the eve of the electoral campaign that would bring Salvador Allende to power, or at least to government. These include discussions of electoral versus revolutionary strategy and how and to what extent these things can coexist, discussions of US imperialist interference in Chilean politics, One of the challenges of this project, since its inception, has been getting the word out. The billionaire-controlled black box algorithms that dominate our lives don't like small creators or small projects. Nor are they particularly keen on ideological viewpoints that are inconsistent with the whims of billionaires. What's more, they positively detest anyone who isn't paying for reach. And then they turn around and make it ever harder to do even that in a useful way. The result of all this is that there are definitely considerably more people who would be interested in this project than actually see any of my posts about it. And that's why I have a small favor to ask you. Tell your friends about the crowdfunded translation project. Share the completed translations, link the Patreon and the Facebook pages. All those links are in the description. Let people know that this project exists and what it's all about. Let them know that I want to hear their ideas for future crowdfunded translation projects at crowdfunded_translations@elisehendrick.com. And if you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Ultimately, the crowdfunded translation project is for us all. The whole idea is to translate texts that have fallen through the cracks by making it economically viable for a professional translator, i.e. me, to work on them and to make the results freely available to everyone. I think that a lot of great things are coming out of the project, and even more can result from it yet. But it all depends on making the project visible to the people who might benefit from it and consider supporting it. Thank you for watching for this length of time. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that it will encourage you to get in touch with the crowdfunded translation project, look at our translations, to get in touch with, to get involved with the crowdfunded translation project. Make suggestions, read the translations, let people know that this exists. This could be a great resource, but it's been a real fucker trying to get the word out about it. So thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Thank you very much. Even watching this and commenting and leaving a like and sharing it on your platforms, or even to yourself in an email apparently, will help increase the visibility of this video and thus of this project. Thanks so much, and see you on the next stream. Hey, implicit connotations. I'm Elise from the Crowdfunded Translation Project, and wanted to just tell you a little bit about what that project is and give you some updates about what I've been doing with your support. The Inessa Armand project. After finishing Kalantai's social basis of the female question, I put out a call for suggestions for the next project. One of those suggestions that I received was to translate the essays and letters of Inessa Armand, Kalantai's predecessor at the Bolshevik Women's section. Suppressed by Stalin and never translated into English, Armand's writings enrich our understanding of the Bolshevik women's movement in the run-up to the October Revolution and the early days of revolutionary Russia. With your support, I have been able to translate all of her extant essays and am currently raising the last $1,950 to cover the cost of translating the remainder of her extant works, which at this point is just her correspondence. If you would like to support the project, all contributions are beautiful. You'll find links in the description. The Punto Final project is a project that is really just at its inception. Punto Final, for those unfamiliar with it, i.e. likely most of the people watching this right now, was a magazine edited by Manuel Caviese Donoso that ran from 1965 to the eve of the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, and then from 1989 to 2018, publishing a grand total of 894 issues. In addition to being a platform for theoretical and ideological debate, they were also a source of excellent political journalism. Their real-time analysis of political developments in Chile, the rise of the Unidad Popular, the looming coup,
Well, welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button.
I remember in middle school when you felt self-conscious if you were the last one to go through puberty. That really went topsy-turvy, didn't it?
Sometimes the Hasbara, it's too much explaining yourself and it's too apologetic.
Be sure to hit the notifications bell.
I actually do believe Israel won't just bomb countless civilians.
Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook.
You have to be kind to people. Be kind to the guys in this mess in the first place.
Put this up on your Reddit.
Chile is a country.
Be sure to cut and paste, a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group.
It's good to see so many normal people in here.
Now, spanking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your favorite messenger app.
Hello and welcome to Where the Fish Lives. Welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. How's everybody doing? French draws our attention to Bohdan Siriotyuk, who was sentenced to 15 years by the regime in Ukraine for, if I remember correctly, he said or posted some nice things about Lenin. It was something on that order. I had heard about it from, I believe, Marta Havrishko posted about it. I've been wanting to actually find the decision to be able to quote it. But yeah, deeply, deeply fucked up. And a reminder of the fact that people who tell you that there isn't a fascism problem in Ukraine, they are deeply unserious people. Either they don't know what the hell they're talking about, or they hope you don't. So yesterday we started watching a video in which Caleb Maupin of the Creepy Eye explains fascism to us. And I thought we might continue with that. But just in case anyone's watching this who doesn't know who Caleb Maupin and the Creepy Eye are, I thought I would just, the quasi-official trailer of the organization, I would just show that to you. Let me know if I need to adjust the audio. Still proud of how these came out.
In Lower Manhattan in August 2011, one young lad and his unfortunate haircut stood up before a largely indifferent crowd and took a bullhorn in hand.
My name is Caleb, and I'm a student, a former student.
In those days, the streets of New York and the U.S. as a whole teemed with discussions of inequality and class struggle. But Caleb would not be dissuaded from his belief that he was telling people something they'd never heard before.
Against class. And that's what we're talking about. Class against class. Say it with me. Class against class. Class against class.
They did not say it with him.
It's not about a liberal program or a conservative program.
Soon thereafter, his haircut abandoned him, denouncing him as a reactionary pseudo-leftist. And thus began for Caleb Maupin a lifelong mission to find people who would be impressed with the things that came out of his mouth.
I'm still happy with how this came out.
Founding
several years later.
The CPI.
Can't help it with that music.
I was called Nazgul, a sorceress,
Nazgul Ghoul,
transphobe,
fascist sympathizing shitlord,
sex cult leader, pretending to be a left,
a real asshole,
special red boy.
11 years later, now the revered ideological leader of the CPI, Mark II, an older, wiser Caleb Maupin enchants adoring throngs with his trademark combination of white guys and American flags. The ideological leader has now truly come into his own, and thanks to his many revolutionary exploits,
this is the full cut
in the same breath as those of some of the best-known men of our times.
CK and Harvey Weinstein and
Caleb Maupin.
I hasten to note that they said that publicly before any of the allegations came out. Like, I think possibly fully a year before anyone outside of the Creepy Eye had any idea why that would come out.
Action of dudes who get scientifically, measurably negative pussy.
The CPI is an organization dedicated to spreading the revolutionary teachings of ideological leader Caleb Maupin, where all activities are
they
firmly
can't even get
rooted
the flags
in his
to fold the same way.
rule for life.
Being an asshole is not a crime. All along,
communist woke crap. I would get excited about seeing, revolutionary armies marching in uniforms and such.
CPI members are steeped in the revolutionary discipline of Maupin thought and learn essential life skills, such as how to deal with being exposed as a sex
Banking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Or to talk down to the working class.
But welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like
Hey,
button.
Riveroon.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notification bell. Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook. Put this up on your Reddit. Be sure to cut and paste. Cut and paste a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group. Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your
How to stand in solidarity with marginalized groups who are being persecuted by the state.
I would be at risk of arrest, not for the contents of the book, but as a trans person speaking and existing in public. On March 2nd, Tennessee became the first state to ban flag performances. Oh my god! Oh my god!
He really is such a piece of shit.
How to make fascism sound like communism. And much, much more.
Hey,
so if you're one of the many who love to be condescended to, who love social democracy if only it could be more reactionary, who love fascism but wish it could come with a side of welfare state capitalism, or just enjoy saluting flags, or if you've ever wanted to be part of the cult of personality for someone with no discernible personality, the CPI might be for you.
All music performed by the Korean People's Army Band. Okay, so we had started to watch yesterday a video about where Caleb was going to explain fascism to us because he's a professional in the field. He knows about fascism. He's very good at fascism, and that's exactly what you need, is somebody who's really good at fascism to explain it. You know, you want to learn chess from somebody who's really good at chess. You want to learn cooking from someone who's really good at cooking. So if you want to know about fascism, you got to listen to someone who's pretty good. Actually, Caleb isn't really that good at fascism because his cult is just had like, I think 30 people, and he keeps on having to find new premises. So not necessarily great at fascism, but he does want to tell us about it. Where we left off, he was about to tell us about right-wing anti-capitalism. And it occurred to me right after I went off last night that one of the best examples of, at the very least, right-wing anti-capitalist discourse is anti-abolitionists in the 19th century. If you look at the sort of arguments that were made to counter abolitionism in the first half of the 19th century in the U.S., what you'll find is a lot of the time they were making arguments that were at least sort of anti-capitalist coded, where they would say, yeah, you can't really have have their best interest at heart because you support industrial capitalism. You want to exploit them brutally too. What we do isn't like what you do in capitalism. We're nicer to them. They actually, this was a whole fucking thing where it was like, slavery is nicer to black people than industrial capitalism. We're the good ones. You abolitionists are actually a bunch of racists. And I mean, so that is right-wing anti-capitalist discourse anyway. But it'll be interesting to see if he mentions that as we find out what more is coming.
Either. So we're going to talk about all of this tonight, and it's kind of a broad topic we're going to get into, but it's going to be important because there's so much confusion about this. So here we go. what does the word fascism actually mean, and what is right-wing anti-capitalism? Right? We got to go back to the 1920s and 30s. 1922, Italy
becomes an authoritarian dictatorship led by the fascist party in inverted commas. Germany becomes an authoritarian dictatorship led by the Nazi party. Interesting that he doesn't just call them fascist dictatorships, but okay, fine. I'm actually kind of surprised to hear him using the word authoritarian, to be honest. But it seems like it would be easier just to say a fascist dictatorship. Okay, the Anti-Comintern Pact. The ruling class of the United States, Britain, France became heavily divided between those who wanted to align with the Soviet Union against the fascists and those who wanted to align with the fascists against the Soviet Union. They weren't actually all that divided. The ruling class, in the public, the general public, yes. The ruling class were very clear. They liked the fascists. It wasn't something that they felt any need to use dog whistles or be at all coy about. Yeah, they would just publish articles talking about how great Hitler was and hurrah for the black shirts, as the Daily Mail headlined once.
Was in a shithole after World War I. They were on the winning side of World War I, but their economy was doing pretty bad, and people were hungry and unemployed, and there were all kinds of strikes and all of that. So there was a military authoritarian dictatorship that was established. And it was led by a guy named Benito Mussolini.
I love how he assumes that his audience is ignorant as fuck. If he doesn't introduce the concept of Benito Mussolini, then they wouldn't possibly know who this is. Okay, thank you for that pointer. Benito Mussolini is a guy.
And his political party was called the Fascist Party.
Technically it was called Il Partito Nazionale Fascista, the National Fascist Party, but okay.
And so that's where the word fascism actually comes from. And where did he get the name? Well, it was because he was Italian, and he was...
It was because he was Italian.
Very proud of his Italian heritage. He said Italy was a country with proud history and proud tradition, and he was very proud of the Roman Empire. And the fasces was the actual symbol of the Roman Empire. This is the fasces, right? It's an axe with a bundle of rods.
And if you look at dimes from the United States in the 1930s, 1940s, you will find them on the back of them. Actually, I think they're on some state flags as well. I think possibly Indiana.
Around it. And that was the symbol of the Roman Empire. And it's interesting, that symbol is on the dime. It is in the halls of the U.S. Congress. It is a symbol of the Roman Empire.
And a symbol of a capital. The fact that it was adopted, because I don't believe it was on the dime before this. I believe it was the 30s or 40s that the Mercury dime was introduced, and that's when they actually put the fasces on it. Which is interesting because at the time, fascism as an ideology already existed.
That goes back thousands of years to the time, the time of Christ's persecution and crucifixion, and before that, right? The Roman Empire, the symbol that they used was the fasces. Here's another graphic. In ancient Rome, the fasces was a bundle of wooden rods.
Oh, I think we've covered this. How long are we going to spend on the bundle of wooden rods, though?
With red leather. A single stick is easily broken, but together they are extremely strong, and the fasces stands through strength through unity. But another part of the fasces is the axe blade, which symbolized the power of the magistrate, included capital punishment, literally power of life over death. That when you got the death penalty in ancient Rome, only a Roman magistrate could do it, and he would hold the fasces, the authority of the Roman Empire, in his hand when he sentenced you to death.
I have to say, I'm not exactly surprised to see that he's decided to go the route of, we're going to spend like half an hour now talking about the etymology and what the ancient Roman fasces is, and not about why Mussolini. Like, I like how he just sort of says Mussolini, oh, he was just proud of his Italian heritage. You know, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to place his party as some sort of continuity to the Roman Empire, anything manipulative like that. He was just proud of his Italian heritage, and it was kind of a toss-up between this and, like, I don't know, pizza.
You know, and that the fascist kind of really points to why Rome was originally a republic. Originally, Rome did not have an emperor. It had a hereditary senate and an elected national assembly. But only landowning men could vote. Among the landowners of Rome, you had patricians and plebeians, and the patricians and the plebeians got to vote on the National Assembly, and some of the people...
and why are we talking about... Like, I thought we were talking about fascism.
Biggest landowners, they had a hereditary seat in the Senate, and Rome was ruled by a bicameral legislature. It was the Roman Republic. And why were they a republic? Because Rome had a mighty military, and their mighty military controlled the world, controlled the known world, and they extracted slaves and tribute from around the world. And they had a mighty military. It was a military city-state. And in order to raise a big army, they needed all the landowning men to feel like they had some skin in the game. If there was one king at the top, there was no guarantee that when they divided up the loot from all the people that they'd conquered, and they divided up the slaves and the land and the produce and the crops from all the people they looted, there was no guarantee you'd get your fair share. But if you had an elected government, where you, as a landowning male...
How long is he going to be going on like this? We're going to skip ahead a little bit.
Through that empire, we'll control the trade routes and dominate the world with our mighty empire. And that empire will give a vote to every landowning male, so that way he has...
Okay, skipping ahead a little bit more. Oh, okay, finally.
And that has very little to do with what fascism actually is.
Yeah, that's what I would have said. That's why I wouldn't have spent that long on it, actually.
It is, right? That's the Roman Empire. But Mussolini picked it because he was very proud of Italy's history. Italy was not doing too good coming out of World War I. A lot of unemployment, a lot of hunger.
And he said what people needed was, like, sticks. Sticks bound by leather and with a little axe in them.
So he set up this authoritarian military government that crushed the Communist Party and the strikes that were going on, and established a military, government. And
a military government that established a military government. You know, what would we do if we didn't have high-quality explainers like this on YouTube?
Control over the economy, and we now know, it's proven, that Mussolini was funded by the British. The British very much feared that Italy would have a communist revolution.
Okay, I'm curious. He says it's proven. It isn't impossible. I've never heard it before, but I also don't consider it's certainly not implausible, because the British ruling class absolutely loved Mussolini. That is true. Okay, let's see. U.S. Politsturm. March on Rome, coordinated by the British.pdf. Okay, first of all, what is... Yeah, okay. Years ago, it was revealed from Cambridge archives that Mussolini was an agent of British foreign intelligence, paid $6,000 a week from 1917 to 1918. No citation. No citation provided. Also, what is Politsturm? About Us. Okay. Some ML group that I'm not entirely familiar with. Okay, recruited by MI5. £100 weekly rate. Okay, so that is true. Okay, 2009, The Guardian reported on it. Here we go. I'll drop the link in there for anyone interested. I wanted to check that out because A, I hadn't heard about that, and B, one thing that you have to know about LaRouchites, and Caleb is LaRouche adjacent is they attribute all sorts of things to the British royal family that the British royal family, by all available evidence, was not involved in. So, because of that, I try to avoid accepting a sounds legit. Like, that sounded legit, but I like to be sure. So, okay.
In the aftermath of World War I, because there were a lot of communist groups, and Benito Mussolini had originally been a communist, but he had broken with the communists over World War I. He supported World War I. The communists had opposed World War I. And he started his own party that was a breakaway from the Socialist Party of Italy, the Marxists. He started his own party, the Fascist Party, that was supporting World War I. He had a newspaper. He had a group of guys who were his foot soldiers. They're called the Black Shirts. And they got into fistfights and beat up communists and such. And the British were funding him and supporting him. And after World War I, 1922, he established a military dictatorship. 1933, Germany became an authoritarian dictatorship led by the Nazi Party. Nazis were a group that
he's explaining who the Nazis were. He's actually explaining who, like,
similarity that took power in Germany. 1936, Italy, Germany, and Japan aligned together in what was called the Anti-Comintern Pact, right? The Comintern was the Communist International. And in Italy, the Communist Party had been outlawed. All the communists had been thrown in prison. In Germany, the Communist Party had been outlawed. All the Communist Party leaders had been thrown in concentration camps. In Japan, the Communist Party had been outlawed.
For a very long time, it's worth noting in the case of Japan.
The communists had been thrown in prison camps, and Japan was actively trying...
and executed. A lot of them were executed.
Trying to take over China and expanding into Manchuria, colonizing people of Korea. And so they formed the Anti-Comintern Pact. That was the alliance between Italy, Germany, and Japan.
Also, by 1936, Japan had been occupying the whole of Korea for 30 years already. They weren't just colonizing Korea. They had been doing it for a while. Up until it was overtaken by the occupation of Palestine, the Japanese occupation of Korea was actually the longest lasting military occupation of the 20th century. Yeah, of course he left out the anarchists. Of course he left out the anarchists. I was actually going to say that, and it's like, that actually kind of goes, of course he's going to leave that out.
Powers, but it was actually the Anti-Comintern Pact. And they said, basically, we need the rest of the world to do what we did and completely crush communism. And Britain and America and France, they haven't done that. They're weak. And we're going to form an alliance of countries that will absolutely crush the communists. That was the basis of their alliance. Now, the ruling class of the United States, Britain, France, and France became heavily divided because there were some in the American ruling class who wanted to team up with Italy and Japan.
I mean, okay, they were not actually divided. The division didn't happen until considerably later. Like, the division that was going on at this point, we're talking in 1936, was actually over how to deal with Hitler's expansionism. Like, whether to appease him or possibly to oppose him. But in terms of the idea, like, the ruling class was actually quite cool with the fascists in general, and quite openly so in all of those countries.
And Germany, and do the same thing and crush the communists. And there were some who wanted to align with the communists in the Soviet Union.
No, there really weren't. Not in the ruling. There were people who did, but not to any significant degree in the ruling class.
To defeat Italy, Japan, and Germany. And it was a big divide in America. President Roosevelt, he was on the side of the Soviet Union. He wanted to align with the Soviet Union to defeat the Germans and the Italians.
No. Like, in 1941, yes. In 1941, sure. Because in 1941, the U.S. suddenly ended up at war with Germany, because Germany declared war on the U.S. as part of the implementation of the alliance with Japan. But that wasn't what was really going on. Like, there was not any serious support for alignment with the Soviet Union before there was a real commitment to actually go to war.
and the Rockefeller family, because they were oil monopolists, in with the British Empire. They had the same thing. They wanted to dominate the international oil markets, and they saw Germany and France, or they saw Germany and Italy and Japan as rivals in dominating the world oil markets. Whereas the National Association of Manufacturers.
Did Germany dominate the world? I mean, Germany at that time would not have had. I don't think Germany at any point in this relevant period was in a position to dominate the world's oil markets.
Was watching the rise of labor unions, and that was a threat to their profits. And there was all kinds of labor unrest, and they wanted to make a lot of money selling weaponry. Weapons were really good for industrialists. They were involved in with the military. So the idea of having the military rule the country was not so bad. So Henry Ford and the National Association of Manufacturers, they were sympathetic to the Nazis, whereas
Henry Ford especially. So what's interesting in this context, I wonder if he's going to point out, it's interesting that he is pointing out the anti-communism. That is an obvious thing that it would be absurd to leave it out. But it's just that Caleb has been becoming more and more explicitly anti-communist recently, talking about how communism relies on envy and resentment, that's what it's actually based on. So I'm kind of surprised that he would be talking so heavily about it.
Roosevelt's and the Rockefellers, and there are various other people in the more liberal wing of the American establishment. They were sympathetic to the Soviet Union, and that was the big divide in the Western world. Some in the Western world wanted to align with the British Empire and the Soviets against fascism, and some in the Western world wanted to align with the fascists against the Soviet Union and against the British Empire. And that's where it gets confusing. And
it isn't really, though.
And we'll get into the history here, because
although I have a feeling he's going to find a way to make it confusing.
Even though the British ultimately were on the side of America in the Second World War, or on the side of the Soviet Union, Italy, you'd never have had Mussolini if the British hadn't supported it, and the same for Germany. So let's get into the history here. But let's start out with, what does fascism mean? There are generally three Marxist definitions of fascism.
Okay, this is great. Popular Front and Revisionist fascism is the right wing. No, that isn't the definition that anyone's using. Trotskyite, a middle-class radical trend that forms anti-labor militias. Actually, not entirely, tolerably accurate, actually. Third period and sectarian. Anything that sounds like communism but isn't. What?
And they're all wrong, but they all point to some truth. The most common definition of fascism that you will get from Marxists and leftists comes from the Popular Front era, and later was used by the revisionist communist parties, right? So during the Popular Front years, during the 1930s, Roosevelt was a liberal. He was a Democrat. He passed all kinds of pro-labor reforms.
Under massive pressure from the working class
spectrum, and he was against fascism. Whereas the Republicans, there were a lot of Republicans.
I wouldn't say that. He wasn't entirely against fascism. He saw some utility for fascism, and relied on the tools of fascism at home fairly regularly. Ask Japanese Americans, for example.
Wanted to do business with Hitler, etc., and so they were less anti-fascist, you could say.
Less anti-fascist. And I would say, if they wanted to do business with Hitler, they're probably somewhat less anti-fascist.
Communist Party launched what was called the Popular Front, and it was an alliance with Roosevelt against Hitler and against fascism. And the Communist Party...
it didn't start out specifically as an alliance with Roosevelt. It dates back before that. We're talking about, this actually goes back to before Roosevelt was even president. And the idea was to unite, MLs with Social Democrats and liberals, basically everybody who doesn't like fascism to come together, despite all the contradictions that will come from that group of, kind of agglomeration. And fight fascism and then, deal with their own contradictions after defeating it or whatever, is the Popular Front idea. It did ultimately, yes, mean uniting with, like, Roosevelt and stuff, but it is older than that.
They supported Roosevelt, and they endorsed him in the 1936 presidential election. They didn't officially endorse him. They ran their own candidate. They told people, don't vote for Earl Browder, vote for Roosevelt. And that was the correct thing to do. It made sense. Roosevelt was passing all kinds of popular...
Yeah, this is a good time to remember that Caleb Maupin has a hard-on for Roosevelt. He is... really, fundamentally, when you get down to his actual economic policies, he is a Roosevelt-era liberal. And you will never hear a cross word about Roosevelt come out of his mouth.
Labor reforms and encouraging workers to go out on strike and have sit-down strikes. And, the Communist Party functioned as a wing of the Roosevelt movement. And the Roosevelt movement were the liberals. They were the left. So on that basis, the Popular Front made sense. It was a tactic. And they didn't blindly support Roosevelt. For example, Roosevelt presided over Jim Crow segregation. The Communist Party, on the other hand, did everything they could to pass anti-lynching laws. Vito Marcantonio, who was the Communist Party's supporting member of Congress from Harlem, proposed the anti-lynching bill, which the Democrats, Roosevelt's party, voted down. The Communist Party provided defense for the Scottsboro Nine. 9 African-American men accused of rape simply for being in the same train car as a white prostitute. They were going to get the death penalty. The Communist Party provided their lawyers with the International Labor Defense. They weren't blind supporters of Roosevelt. They knew the Roosevelt coalition had a lot of problems, like Jim Crow, etc.
Which is, again, where you can't really say that Roosevelt was totally against fascism.
However, they were part of the Roosevelt...
Because fundamentally, Roosevelt was an anti-communist. The fact that he moved to the left on certain things was entirely because of the kind of pressure that he was under. And he was very much in favor of promoting a sort of, very much the kind of explicit class collaborationist worldview in very similar terms to what you find in fascist ideology.
Listen, it was a tactic. However, after the Second World War, you had McCarthyism, and the Communist Party was, heavily crushed, by the FBI, forced into illegality. And after McCarthyism, you then had Khrushchev, who gave his secret speech, where he denounced Stalin, and the Soviet leaders denounced Stalin, and there was this big de-Stalinization effort. And coming out of that, the Communist Party of the United States and the Communist parties of the world were what you could call revisionist, meaning that they...
This is... it's always interesting when you hear when people declare things revisionist. Because the fact is that revisionism is something... Lots of people... Lots of tendencies within Marxism-Leninism and within, sort of the broad left could be described accurately as revisionist. Revisionism happens all the time. What is telling is when somebody declares it a bad thing. Because, to a great extent, Lenin was actually quite revisionist. He differed heavily from Marx because he decided from practical standpoints that it wasn't, it made sense in terms of what he was trying to do. Stalin was a huge revisionist. He, introduced all sorts of just capitalist-style management philosophies into the Soviet economy. So the idea that you're only a revisionist when you decide to reject certain aspects of what Stalin did is just wild, really. And the idea that revisionism is inherently bad as well is just... I've always found that buck wild, because... The thing is, if we're serious about using, Marx, for example, as a tool of social analysis and struggle, then there will be times when it turns out that something that he proposes and made sense at the time he proposed it doesn't necessarily work as well as he might have expected. That we know more, and so... certain things need to be revisited in order to achieve the same goal. That is also revisionism. But, there is lots of revisionism. But the idea that revisionism is inherently bad is just sort of really brought from the ideological arsenal of organized religion more than anything. But then the idea that, okay, if you accept that revisionism is inherently bad, the idea that it was people who rejected Stalin, in some respect, who were the ones doing it, is a little cute.
They weren't advocating full-on anti-imperialism. They were wanting the
Neither was Stalin, it's worth noting.
United States to go easier on the Soviet Union, and
So
they
was Stalin.
voted for the Democrats as a way of doing that. The idea was the Democrats will be nicer to the Soviet Union than the Republicans will, so we want the Democrats in office. So the definition of fascist that you get, it's still today the most common definition of fascist you get from leftists, comes from all of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, when you ask leftists, I mean, what they just say is fascism is the right wing. Yeah, I'm sure.
From the Popular Front era, but really from the revisionist communist parties of the Cold War years, which is, fascism is the right wing. If people are conservative, and the right wing becomes more authoritarian and stuff, they're fascist, right?
Well, that's part of it, surely.
And the argument that the Communist Party USA and Democratic Socialists of America and people like that use is they say, well, they would say Reagan is kind of like a fascist. And
well, there's a difference between somebody being kind of like something and saying that somebody is the thing.
Reagan gets reelected, he's going to move us closer toward fascism. So
yeah, I mean, and he did. He absolutely did.
We have to vote.
And again, that's not the same thing as saying fascism is the right wing. That's saying that that people who want to do, consistent reactionary politics will be moving us in that general direction. That's not the same thing.
Creeping fascism was their argument, right? And they said this during the Bush years, right?
And they were right.
The Communist Party and the world can't wait. It was
I mean, are you going to make an argument against this?
Without the Bush regime, Bush is a fascist, right? This argument that conservative...
I mean, we're talking about Bush too. His favorite legal philosopher was literally Carl Schmitt, the official legal philosopher of the Nazi Party.
Are fascist. If the conservatives are in power, they'll just get more and more authoritarian and more right-wing. And next thing you know...
Hey, wait, again, are you saying they're wrong, Caleb?
Pick up in its Nazi Germany. Well, there's an element of truth in that. And in the 1930s, yes, it was...
See, I mean, the way he talks about it, it doesn't sound like that's what he's going for. Because... he's doing this thing where it obviously is meant to sound very mocking. But, yeah, he isn't going to argue with it. Because, I mean, you really can't argue with it. You can't look at where we are after 40 years of just straight-up right-wing policies, uninterrupted, and where we've ended up, and not say that there is a fair bit of truth to the idea that consistently maintained reactionary political agendas are going to move us in the direction of fascism until fascism becomes a real possibility.
It's true, the Republicans were more sympathetic to the Nazis and to the Italian fascists than the Democrats were. And, there was an element...
I mean, not to mention that literally... during the Bush 1 years, one of the big Bush administration scandals... I mean, back in those days, this was a scandal. These days, it wouldn't manage to be. Anyone who tried to say it was a bad thing would be, claimed to be doing Russian disinformation. But the Republican Party under Bush 1 had this group called the Office of Ethnic Outreach. And it turned out the Office of Ethnic Outreach was run by former SS officers. Former Nazi collaborators who joined the local units of the SS in occupied Europe. And it was a whole big scandal and nothing happened, basically. So yeah, I mean, you could say, actually, there is a certain affinity to fascism. Amongst
certainly
right-wingers.
in, kind of like, both Italy and Germany had a right-wing authoritarian, right-wing nationalist, militarist, anti-communist edge to their ideology.
I wouldn't call it an edge. I would say that's actually kind of the meat of the thing. That's not just the edge.
That's not really the essence of what fascism is.
Oh, it isn't. It isn't the essence of what... Okay, now I really can't wait. So, militant anti-communism and anti-work... So being militantly nationalist and anti-communist and authoritarian and anti-worker is not the essence of what fascism is? Oh, I can't wait. We're gonna learn so much.
So, that's the most common definition of fascism. And that's your typical leftist, Trump is a fascist because he's right-wing, because...
Well, I mean, and also because he does all these fascist things, and he has all this fascist support, and also, even if we accept, which is unreasonable, that he's so fucking out of it that you can't really attribute a consistent ideological position to him, the people around him are literal fucking neo-Nazis, a lot of them, so yeah.
He's racist because he's scary. Well, plenty of people have been racist in history. That's not what fascism is.
Yeah, I know. It's so wild. That's so wild. I mean, look at how he just completely shot down the straw man argument he just pulled out of his ass 1 minute earlier. This is why he's the ideological leader of the cult he started. Because he can shoot down his own straw man arguments.
Many people have been authoritarian in history. That's not what fascism is. Many people have been nationalist in history. That's not what fascism is. But that's the most...
Well, yeah. What if people aren't actually saying that any one of those things on its own is automatically fascism? Could it possibly be that people are saying that when you combine those things in a particular way, that's kind of what starts making fascism happen?
Common things. Like, fascism is the right wing, right? And it made sense to say...
I mean, it's more...
that in the 1930s. It was opportunistic to say that in the Cold War years, and now it's completely...
Of course he has nothing to say about ICE. And I wonder, since Trump actually said that he was willing to consider reducing the extremely dangerous and provocative U.S. military exercises on the southern limit line of the demilitarized zone in Korea, whether Caleb is going to bring back his own little historical revisionism where he pretends that Trump was trying to bring about the peaceful reunification of Korea.
Out of touch. Now, at the same time that the Popular Front was going on, that the Communist Party was trying to build an alliance with Roosevelt, Leon Trotsky didn't agree with Roosevelt.
Why do we call him
Trotsky
Leon? His name was Yev. Yev Trotsky. Yev. L-E-V. Yev. Why the fuck do we call him Leon?
Stalin had their falling out. Trotsky fled the Soviet Union. He was building his own brand of communism that was different from Soviet communism. And one thing that Trotsky was doing is Trotsky did not support the Popular Front. He said the Popular Front was a betrayal.
Which is interesting when you think about it, because when you look at Trotskyist groups, in particularly the ones I'm familiar with in Europe, they're big into the Popular Front. It's like the one thing that they do. Like the Socialist Workers' Party in Britain, I mean, it's either, there's Sex Pestery and there's Popular Front. All the Trotskyist groups I know of in Europe are big into Popular Front. They don't call it that, but it's what they do.
Trotsky was most likely being funded by the Nazis, right?
There's no evidence of this. This was something that Soviet propagandists under Stalin put out there. It is no support has ever been provided for it. At all.
And, I mean, in some cases, like in Spain, that was blatantly obvious.
No, it wasn't actually. No evidence. Again, this is completely made up.
Oh, and there's, examples of, like, how the Nazis admitted they had a Trotskyite radio broadcast that they were sending into the Soviet Union.
Which is not actually the same thing, and also citation needed. There's actually a much stronger argument to be made for a Soviet fascist alliance in Spain, because and not necessarily an explicit one, but because the Soviet forces and the Soviet-backed forces and the Spanish fascists were attacking the same people at the same time, namely the milicianos. They were attacking the militias and the Spanish Revolution because they had both identified that as the thing that needed to be crushed. So, I mean, I've never seen any evidence that they actually coordinated that. To my knowledge, nobody claims that they coordinated that, but it's still way stronger evidence than was ever provided for these smears that first of all, when you hear about Trotskyists in the context of Spain, you have to keep in mind that that was a term that was just thrown about very liberally by the Soviet-aligned forces. Basically, anyone who was not aligned directly with them was a Trotskyist. They would refer to groups that would absolutely vehemently and offendedly deny having anything to do with Trotskyists, just because they were rejecting the Soviet Union's line on what to do in Spain.
It's not exactly clear, but Trotsky and his allies, who, just like the communists, worked in labor unions and all of that, they built their own brand of communism or socialism.
I like how he goes, it's not exactly clear. It actually is. There's never been any evidence for it.
But they were against the Soviet Union, and they were against the Popular Front. So in order to not have the Popular Front and vote for the Democrats and support Roosevelt, they had to develop their own definition of fascism. And just like the other definition...
See, I do not necessarily think that's the order in which these things happened.
You know, there's an element of truth in it. Trotsky said fascism is a middle-class radical trend that forms anti-labor militias.
That's part of what he said. I mean, those are definitely things that he said. That's not the entire thing, because the point was that fascism forms as sort of the immune system of capitalism when it's in crisis.
So basically, fascism is a radical movement that's not of the working class, but is of the middle class. It's middle-class radicals who form anti-labor militias. And there's an element of truth in that, right? That Mussolini...
It's also not the entire definition.
He had a lot of middle-class people who supported him. Hitler had a lot of middle-class people who supported them, and Mussolini formed his black shirts that were anti-labor. They were not the government. They were...
Also, the term was not middle-class, it was petit bourgeois. It was specifically about small shopkeepers, because small shopkeepers and small landowners were, I mean, in Germany in particular, absolutely the base for fascism.
Anti-labor street fighters that fought against labor unions, right? So there's some truth in that.
There's a lot that I have to say, I'm not a Trotskyist. I have a lot of disagreements with him and with the praxis of the movements that follow him. I mean, there are also things I agree with, and there are people in those movements that I respect, I should say. But I think that a lot of what he had to say about fascism was actually quite good. It aged well. And one of the unfortunate things is that a lot of his modern followers don't take him seriously. Because if you look at, like, again, I have to bring up the SWP in Britain. Because if you look at what Trotsky said about what to do with fascists, I mean, he said what you've got to do is actually develop working class self-defense groups that will physically defend and physically deny space to fascists. And go out there and basically just kick their asses and get them and move them on. And when you look at what the SWP's practice, or their front group, their popular front group, they don't call it a popular front because they're against popular fronts because they're Trotskyists, but it's popular front. That's the whole mechanism of the thing, called Unite Against Fascism. And what they do is actually, anytime somebody tries to actually physically defend their community against fascists, they call the cops on them. They try to stop anyone who goes to their marches participating in any kind of direct community defense against fascist groups. They have actually sabotaged anti-fascist actions. I witnessed one in Swansea that they completely screwed. Though we still ended up having a pretty good turnout because enough people did not trust the SWP at that point to believe when they claimed that the fascists in Swansea had canceled their rally.
Hitler had a lot of middle-class people who supported him, and his, brown shirts, what were they called? The stormtroopers. They were against the labor movement, and
I love that he comes so prepared. He even knows obscure things like what Hitler's paramilitary group was called. No, he doesn't know that because it's an obscure thing. How would anyone know what the Sturmabteilung were?
It was the middle-class radicals.
It's only one of the main things people know about Hitler who don't know much about Hitler.
From their own anti-labor militias. There's truth in that. That's not the essence of what it is.
Okay. What is the essence then, Caleb? Because actually, all of that sounds very much like the essence of what it is.
Plenty of anti-labor militias. There are plenty of middle-class radicals, and during the Popular Front.
Well, yes, but there's a difference between people who are middle class and are radicalized in some way, and people who are petty bourgeois and who are specifically radicalized to defend the capitalist system from what they see as the most immediate threats, namely organized workers and marginalized people.
It must be pointed out, the Communist Party also had a lot of middle-class radicals who supported it. Right?
This is why, see, again, this is Caleb refuting his own straw man.
The Popular Front meant that they had a lot of people in Hollywood and a lot of people on Broadway and a lot of college professors, a lot of middle-class people who supported them. Did they form anti-labor militias? No, but...
No, because they were ideologically on a different side. That's why this is that is why your, misrepresentation of the Trotskyist definition is suboptimal, because it's one thing to say that there were people who were, petty bourgeois and radicalized. It's another thing to specify what that radicalization even was.
Actually, during the Second World War, the Communist Party signed a no-strike pledge and was not in favor of strikes because they said everything for victory. So,
but only after, it's worth noting, that was after the Soviet Union had joined the war.
That Trotskyite definition of fascism, but that's not the essence of it, right? It's not, yes, fascists come out of middle-class radical trends. Yes, they formed anti-labor militias. That's not the essence of it.
I can't wait for this jabroni to tell us what the essence is.
Now, prior to the Popular Front, right, before the Anti-Comintern Pact was signed in 1936, before the Seventh World Congress of the Communist International...
the Popular Front was already something that was going on before Hitler came to power.
Early 1930s. The Communist Party made a really big point of going after the Social Democratic Party. And the Socialist Party, the Social Democrats, and saying that they were the main roadblock to revolution.
And they were outright... In fact, they were sending the Freikorps to attack communists. They were outlawing communist groups, but not outlawing fascists. When you actually look at what the SPD, the Sozialdemokratische Partei Deutschlands, German Social Democrats, were doing in government, you can actually see where the phrase social fascists come from, because the SPD were absolutely coming out and doing all sorts of things that objectively, undeniably aided the Nazis. They would ban communist paramilitary groups that were fighting the Nazis, but they never banned the Nazis themselves. All those sorts of things.
And they called them social fascists. And in the early 1930s, the literature of the Communist Party basically argued that fascism was an attempt to imitate communism by the capitalists. Basically, if something
in terms of the propaganda, yeah, actually, because often what they would do, and in fact, the most successful elections that the Nazis contested back when they actually had to contest elections, were elections in which they plagiarized and somewhat modified communist slogans and tried to make it about, like, improving the economy for working people or something like that. But they would, somehow manage to sort of squeeze the emancipatory and class-conscious content out of it while still trying to make the same point.
Sounds like communism, but it's not. It's
This is actually a good point, because we're talking here, we're looking at Caleb Maupin, who for a long time, before he decided to call himself an innovationist, was a guy who would try to sound like communism, but he wasn't a communist.
Fascist. And there's an element of truth in that, too, right? If you look at what, if not, it's fascist. And there's an element of, if some...
Okay, that is such a... I was trying to figure out what the hell he meant by this, anything that sounds like communism but isn't. But now that I heard what he said, that is buck wild. Because the point, they weren't trying to define fascism when they made this point. They were observing that the Nazis and the fascists in Italy, rather, not Europe, yes, Europe, but specifically Italy, what they would do is try to copy ideas that communists were using, copy their slogans, and try to peel off support by saying, look, we actually also are for these things, we're also concerned about these things, but we're not going to do communism about them. We're going to do some other stuff about them. That was the whole thing. It wasn't this, so they weren't trying to define fascism by saying anything that sounds like communism but isn't. They were trying to say this is a specific thing that these specific fascists are specifically doing right the fuck now.
To imitate communism by the capitalists. Basically, if something sounds like communism, but it's not, it's fascist. And there's an element of truth in that, too.
That's literally not what they were saying.
What the Nazis were doing, if you look at what the Italian fascists were doing, they were building a mass movement that talked about tearing down the rich, that talked about fighting...
They didn't talk about tearing down the rich, actually. They talked about, in the case of the Nazis, they were specifically talking about tearing down the Jews. Hey, old owl hootin', we're learning so much about fascism from the Caleb Maupin of the Creepy Eye.
Man that was against the Soviet Union, and it looked kind of like communism, except it was against communists. That's true. And that when the fascists took power, they tried to have heavy economic control over the economy. They didn't nationalize anything for the most part, but they had to have heavy economic controls, and they promised to bring stability.
And in fact, they actually privatized certain things. Although, in the case of the Nazis, they did, at least temporarily, they did actually nationalize literally all property belonging to Jews, personal property and real property. Some of that was then transferred over to Nazi cronies and things like that through the Aryanizations, and other of it became state property.
It's kind of like communism, but it's not. And during the early 1930s, the Communist Party spoke of fascism as, they talked about social fascism, as fascism is, it's something that's...
The social fascism, they were talking specifically about the Social Democrats.
Sounds like communism, but it's not.
That's not why they were saying that about the Social Democrats. They weren't saying... Social fascism is not something they were saying about the Nazis. They were saying that about the Social Democrats, because the Social Democrats were objectively carrying water for the Nazis.
And you get that today from a lot of like Maoist kind of people, right? If you're the wrong kind of communist, you must be a fascist, right? If you're...
this is wild coming from Caleb Maupin, who looks at people who have much better claim to ever having been any kind of communist than he's ever had, and he immediately declares them all CIA.
So if you preach communist revolution, but you do it in a way I don't like, you're a fascist, right? And some of these Maoist groups will say things like Bernie Sanders is a fascist. Well, Bernie Sanders is not a fascist.
Though he does have a history of hanging out with people who are, at the very least, rather adjacent to them, and being sort of politically allied with them. You look at his anti-immigrant rhetoric, for example. and his friendly relations with Lou Dobbs, and you can see why somebody might say that.
He's a liberal, right? But, you know, because he sounds kind of like a communist, but he's not. He's a fascist.
No, that's not why anyone is saying that. That's literally not why anyone's saying that. It's not if you sound like a communist. Like, this was not an attempt to define fascism when they were saying this in the 30s. They were observing things about propaganda tactics.
Of course, CPI. We get targeted with this like you wouldn't believe.
Well, yes, but not because you are like looking like communists but aren't. But of course, you do occasionally try to look like communists but aren't them. But because you hang out with fascists, with the LaRouchites and Dugin and the fucking Moonies.
Because we're not, we wave the American flag. At the same time, we advocate for a government of working families. We're definitely fascists because we sound like communists.
Well, yeah, that's why. The working families thing is totally why people say that they're fascists.
But we're not, so you're fascists. Well, that's not the essence of it. Again.
Okay, when are we going to hear about the essence,
It points to an element of truth. Fascists often do kind of sound like communists, but they definitely aren't.
Yeah, like Caleb, our special boy.
So that's an element of truth. None of these three definitions really get to the essence of what fascism actually is. Fascism is degrowth.
The thing is, thinking about that for a second, I should have seen that bullshit coming, but still, that is wild. Because literally that is the opposite of what every single fucking fascist movement has done. They have all sought to restore growth in situations that where growth was being challenged in one way or another, including by the prospect of revolution. None of these, fucking, the Nazis weren't degrowth. They were absolutely trying to grow the economy in a particular way. Same with the fucking Italian fascists. Same with the Franquistas. Same with Pinochet. But the thing that you have to know about this is that Caleb also doesn't know what degrowth is.
Fascism is degrowth. When capitalism is in a long-term economic crisis, the only way out is to destroy the productive forces of society.
That's literally when... What? Okay, so when exactly did the Nazi... I think what he's going to say is that's why they started the war. Not because they wanted to control more land and resources and money and stuff, but to destroy the productive forces? Is that where he's going with this?
And fascism is doing that, right? That's the essence of what fascism is. But beyond the three kind of marks...
Oh, wow, he's still lying about Susan Sontag.
Right? That's the essence of what fascism is. But beyond the...
Wait, a crypto-Zionist undertone, he says, deep down ordinary people are fascists. If you know anything about the history of Zionism and its relationship with fascists, that doesn't work.
The three kind of Marxist definitions, right? You get, the revisionist, Popular Front one. You get the Trotskyite one. You get
all of them digested through the sigmoid colon of Caleb Maupin.
Third period and sectarian one. But then there's also the new left.
It is wild to watch him explain anything that you actually know about, because he doesn't. What he's good at is sounding. He's good at that confident lecturer tone, despite the fact that he has not in fact earned the confidence.
Definition of fascism. And this is really pushed hard in the universities. Starting in the 1950s, the CIA funded the Congress for Cultural Freedom. and they started subsidizing leftist magazines. Partisan Review, and Encounter magazine in Britain, and Der Monat, and, you know...
Der Monat. Der Monat. Der Monat.
There was the authoritarian personality study that, you know, Theodore Adorno was paid by the CIA.
Oh, he's got the Frankfurter Schule in here.
He's a Frankfurt School academic, and he published this book about what fascism is, and it's called The Authoritarian Personality. It's all about how fascism is. Some people believe right and wrong exists.
Oh, is that what it is? Is that what he said? Some people believe right and wrong exist. Oh, that's a lot of words to say that.
And some people, want to give their lives to join mass movements. And some people are not a bunch of pessimistic, cynical academics like he is. Some people...
I wonder why somebody who was persecuted by the Nazis and, like, kicked out of his home country might have been pessimistic about things.
Have what he calls an authoritarian personality. And they might become Roman Catholic, and they might become a communist, and they might become a fascist, or they might become a social democrat or whatever, but the authoritarian personality, authoritarianism, populism, fascism is an aesthetic. And this is what the CIA funded like crazy. Susan Sontag, she wrote an essay called Fascinating Fascism.
Yes, and he loves to misquote this. I don't actually feel like getting the actual quote. I don't know if he's going to do the same thing that he's done previously, but he literally just omits entire sections from what she said in order to make it sound like she's saying the opposite of what she actually said.
Or the New York Times Review of Books. And she said that fascism, I guess there was this former Nazi filmmaker, what was her name?
Leni Riefenstahl. Fucking hell, this guy knew he was going to talk about fascism. He did not prepare at all.
Former Nazi filmmaker who'd made some Nazi films, and after World War II, she did a photo display.
Yeah, a former Nazi filmmaker who made some Nazi films. Well, I mean, that really that encapsulates it. I'm surprised to hear that a Nazi filmmaker would have made Nazi films.
Of different African tribes. She went to Africa and found some kind of indigenous African tribes and did a photo display of them.
Wait, in Africa she found that? So the Nazi filmmaker who made the Nazi films found Africans in Africa.
And, according to...
Where did she go to find the tautologies, though?
According to Susan Sontag, this Leni Riefenstahl's photo display was fascist. And why was it fascist? Well, it glorified strength. And it had a dramaturgy of leader and chorus. And
okay, so identifying things that actually are very common to fascist iconography.
The people were working together to achieve a goal.
Okay, that's what it was. Okay, what he leaves out is that she very specifically points out that there is a huge difference between... She says that there is some similarity in the aesthetic between, like, the fascist aesthetic and the communist aesthetic in some respects. But then she goes on to say, and Caleb always leaves this out, I'm glad I remembered, that actually when you look at the communist stuff, it's actually quite different for various reasons that she goes into, so it's only a superficial similarity. Which is to say that she was actually making the point that other people had previously made, that to a great extent, fascism tries to plagiarize communism in certain ways, but then modify it.
My God, and all of that was fascist, right? Physical fitness and people working together to achieve a goal, and optimism and hope, it's all fascist, right? And eventually Susan Sontag said, communism is nothing but the most effective form of fascism. Fascism with a human face. I mean, this is ridiculous, but she said that. Susan Sontag, the CIA-funded intellectual, basically said communism and fascism are the same thing, and communism...
I mean, he's still speaking of CIA-funded as a pejorative, which, I mean, I agree. It isn't generally a good look to be taking money from the fucking CIA. Though it is worth noting that a lot of the people that he's mentioned, the thing about the way that intelligence services like the CIA work is, for the most part, they do not actually want the people receiving their support to know whose support they're receiving. Like, they actually go to considerable lengths so that people who they are in some way elevating will not be aware, will think that it's coming from someplace else. I mean, I'm reminded of this often when I'm doing work on the Punto Final translation project, because if you look at what the CIA had to say about Eduardo Frei Montalva, who was the president of Chile in the late 60s, and was funded by the CIA starting in 64. Oh no, in 62. If you look at what you can find in the declassified record, the CIA was saying at one point in 1964, this is why I got the dates confused, that they had decided previously, in line with the official policy of the program that they were doing all of this under the auspices of, they had gone through all sorts of cutouts to ensure that Frei and the Christian Democratic Party that he belonged to would not realize what the source of their funding was. But they had decided in 64 that it was time that he be allowed to infer that he was directly being bankrolled by the CIA in order to be able to exert more pressure over him. Now, so the thing is, just because it turns out that the CIA is sending funding to people does not by any means mean that these people have any idea that that's where the money's coming from. The CIA actually, and other intelligence services, are very careful not to make that difficult to work out on the part of the recipients of their support unless they really want people to know. That's one thing. Hey,
the most
Badger.
effective form because it seems human, and Hannah Arendt was another one of these CIA-funded intellectuals, worked for Partisan Review magazine, etc. And when Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi war criminal, was abducted from Argentina, brought to Israel, and put on trial for killing Jews and in World War II, and then given the death penalty.
I mean, and let me say, Arendt sucks on a number of levels, but there are a couple of interesting things about her. For one thing, actually, her treatment of the Eichmann trial is absolutely worth reading. It's quite interesting. And not least because Eichmann made no secret of his relationship with the Zionist movement at the time that he was committing all of these atrocities. Also, it's worth, I mean, one of the most, just embarrassingly ironic things in Germany recently is that they hand out something called the Hannah Arendt Prize. And they actually decided to withhold the Hannah Arendt Prize from somebody because they had been opposed to the genocide in Palestine. Apparently, the German organization that was doing this did not realize that by their own standards, Hannah Arendt would not have been eligible for the Hannah Arendt Prize because she was extremely critical of the Zionist movement. She did not think highly of it, actually.
Which, by the way, was totally not legal in any legitimate way. Israel didn't exist at the time the Holocaust was going on.
Well, universal jurisdiction over these sorts of atrocities would make it legal. Basically, anyone would have had the authority to try him and convict him for those things. What wasn't strictly legal was abducting him and that, but
definitely was a Nazi war criminal. He definitely did participate in the Holocaust. But
he coordinated. He was the logistics guy for the Holocaust.
Absolutely no legal right to do what they did because, a country that doesn't exist is going to enforce its laws retroactively. How does that work?
I mean, the People's Republic of Poland did it. The German Democratic Republic did it. against Nazi war criminals. It's worth noting. Let me see what other people's republics of Central and Eastern Europe. Lots of them actually did the exact same thing. These were states that did not exist at the time. And so, and they actually tried Nazi war criminals who, for crimes that they had committed. There is no jurisdictional requirement that a state exist at the time of a crime in order to try it. The usual requirement is that that crime actually be illegal at the time. And if you wanted to make this sort of argument, and it's kind of interesting to see Caleb Maupin getting offended on behalf of Adolf Eichmann of all fucking people, but the argument you would make is that it was not actually legally specified as an offense at the time that he did it. That would be the argument, that it's what's called ex post facto. That's the argument, not you can't try somebody, a state that didn't exist at the time of the crime cannot try people for the crime. That's nonsense.
Right, but, kind of like Trump kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, and he just said,
it's not like that. Like, fuck Israel on so many levels. And but Eichmann and Maduro, not the same thing, actually. Wait, I did not think where we would be going when I turned this on was Caleb Maupin deciding that the thing Israel did that he's going to get pissed off over is abducting Eichmann. It's like, if that's the only thing that Israel got up to, if that's all Zionists did, if they just went around abducting and killing Nazi criminals, I don't think anyone would have a real objection to them. The reason that normal people object to Zionism is because it's a racist colonialist ideology and is displacing and genociding Palestinians. But no, go off, Caleb. Tell us about how they actually suck because they tried and executed Eichmann.
He may be the leader of a foreign country. We're going to decide that
he was a
person we don't like in some other country, we're going to drag him here.
Yeah, but the thing is, are we really going to pretend that it's the same thing to just abduct the, elected president of another country on some bullshit charges and exercising universal jurisdiction over a guy who was responsible for the deaths of millions of people? I mean, is that really the comparison you want to draw, Caleb?
A country, and accuse them of crimes. It's kind of like that, except, a little bit even less legal.
Wait, what the fuck? He's saying that it's less... The thing that he's saying is less legal is the abduction of Eichmann. Not... Which actually... There is actually a reasonable legal argument to be made, since the Nuremberg... I mean, if you're going to accept the legality of the Nuremberg trials, which also did the ex post facto thing, then you really cannot actually challenge the legality of the abduction and trying of Eichmann, because the only legal objection was that it's ex post facto. Otherwise, it's a universal jurisdiction offense he was charged with, and he was convicted of it. Any state could have done it, and one state did.
Israel didn't exist at the time.
But he's saying now that that trying and convicting Eichmann, who actually committed crimes against humanity, who committed fucking genocide, is less legal than abducting Nicolás Maduro in order to come up with a bullshit case against him that apparently, according to some leaks from the administration, is about torturing him into admitting in court that he gifted the election to Joe Biden. That's what came out of this motherfucker's mouth. That of the two things, trying Eichmann and convicting him and abducting Maduro. Abducting Maduro was the more legitimate one.
That the Holocaust was happening. Adolf Eichmann had been a participant in the Holocaust. He had, killed a bunch of Jews in Nazi Germany. He fled to Argentina.
Actually, I mean, he didn't personally kill them. He organized the logistics of the Holocaust, and he actually didn't do it so much in Germany as he did in Hungary and Austria. He actually kind of traveled around a lot because he was a logistics guy.
Israel sent their spies to Argentina. They arrested him. They dragged him to Israel. And they put him on trial for crimes that were committed before the state of Israel had ever been created.
Man, fucking look things up occasionally in your life, you fucking plunker. That doesn't make it illegal.
And they found him guilty, and they hung Adolf Eichmann. And before they hung him, they sent Hannah Arendt, the CIA-funded left-wing academic, to interview him and to sit.
Well, no, that's not how this worked. She was a correspondent who was reporting on the entire trial. That's what Eichmann in Jerusalem is about. She was reporting, she watched the whole trial, and she wrote about it. They sent, wait, are we saying Israel sent her, or the CIA sent her? I mean, I guess it could be both.
And she wrote a whole book called Eichmann in Jerusalem. And if you read her book, it's all about how it's Eichmann in Jerusalem, a study in the banality of evil.
Yeah, I mean, her whole point, and it is actually a valid point, is that you want Eichmann, somebody who has all this blood on his hand, somebody who was central, one of the leading, the linchpin of the entire genocidal system operated by the Nazis. You want him to be some kind of a, comic book monster. And the reality is he was a boring asshole who spoke in cliches and was just, your everyday bureaucratic schmuck. He could have worked anywhere. He would have been just as at home in, the DMV or something like that as he was in charge of the section of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt that was in charge of mass murdering Jews. That was the whole point. It's actually quite, when you actually look into Eichmann as a person, absolutely true. He was not what you would hope for if you were looking for a comic book monster. He was just a boring motherfucker who was raised in a culture where you did your job and you didn't ask questions. And he was given this particular job, and he did it and didn't ask questions.
Banality, meaning normalness, unimportantness, ununiqueness. And it was all about...
He thinks... He has such a low opinion of his viewers. He explains everything. You explained earlier who the Nazis were. It's like, this is who Mussolini was. As if people didn't know.
Eichmann was just an ordinary man. Before he was a Nazi, he was in the YMCA.
He was actually last I checked, a traveling vacuum cleaner salesman for a while.
He was just an ordinary guy who lived in Germany and happened to join the Nazi Party. And what Hannah Arendt is saying is that deep down, ordinary people are Nazis.
That is not what she was saying, for fuck's sake. But before I fucking blow a blood vessel listening to this, it is actually time for me to wrap up for tonight. Thank you so much for everyone for joining in. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I'm going to be taking the next couple of weeks off. I'm going to be out of town amongst other things, but I'll be back after that, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for sharing the stream and supporting the stream in all the ways that you do. And just for being in chat. I always enjoy you. Have a very good rest of your